You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is award-winning executive producer and director, Nathaniel Lezra. And we're going to be talking, did I say the last name correctly? Okay,
Yeah, you did.
great, Nathaniel. And we're going to be talking about his wonderful documentary entitled Roads of Fire, which had its world premiere at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. And that's when I met Nathaniel at the film festival. And that was in February. And I said, when you get distribution, I want to have you on the show. And here we are,
Yeah, indeed.
not quite a year later, but here we are. So,
Yeah.
so happy to have you on the show, Nathaniel.
It's so exciting to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So you won at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. You won the Best Documentary Feature.
Mm.
What was that like for you?
It was a total shock, to be honest. It was a total thrill. When you make a film like Roads of Fire, it's such a grassroots effort. It's a truly independent film. We, had a number of financiers who were lovely and got us moving, but it truly is an effort of labor, of love, of sweat. And when you get that recognition on that platform, I mean, it's transformative and it's beyond you know, thrilling.
Yes, I can imagine totally, 100%. So our audience knows. Let's tell them what Roads of Fire is all about.
Sure. So Roads of Fire examines the what we call the migration crisis in the Western Hemisphere. It looks at immigration broadly through the lens of the human smuggling industry. So it looks at it's what people call a triptych. It tells three different stories as our lens to interrogate this subject. We went to Colombia and we embedded with a human smuggler and we examined the $35 billion human smuggling industry and how that relates to the migration crisis as experienced here in New York and in the States. And then in New York, we follow the humanitarian volunteers who stepped up to fill the systemic holes that were left by the Adams administration. And then our third story profiles a wonderful asylum seeker in New York, a young mother who is just going through the process and fighting for her asylum and is just, working to make ends meet. And we tell her story juxtaposed with these other stories, and that's what the film is about.
It's a gripping film. It's the way you have set it up. It's set up almost like a thriller, and, and some
Mm.
of these segments, what's going to happen, and it stays with you. I mean, as I said, I saw it in February. Here we are in November, and that film stuck with me and stayed with me, and that's the sign of a good film. It's,
Mm.
when you kind of leaves your consciousness, you go, oh, okay, that was all right, that was okay film. This one was gripping, and as I said, stayed with me. When did you start filming this?
So we started filming at, I think, what people would call the peak of this crisis. So around 2022, the winter. So wow, it's November 2025. So almost 3 years, almost to the day we were shooting.
Okay, when you started filming it. So
Yeah.
subsequently, obviously things have changed dramatically in the immigrant landscape
Mhm, mhm.
from when you filmed it, and it wasn't good then, and so now it's even more difficult. And today in the New York Times, this morning, they said there are 52 million immigrants. Half of
Mm,
them are naturalized citizens, and less and feel less safe than they
mm.
have in the past. But 70%, so they did obviously a survey of
Yeah,
immigrants, and
yeah.
70% said they would still move here despite
Mhm.
everything that's going on. So when you look at what's going on today, how do you feel about when you made this film? Because to be honest with you, when I watched it, I was like, when you see what they have to go through to come
Mm,
to this country, it's kind of harrowing. I mean, it
mhm.
really is. It's life and death. And you go, why would you want to come here and come to this country so badly to go through the trials and tribulations and everything that they have to do, even after they get here. And now the situation is far worse than when they all arrived. So do you have some thoughts about that, when you followed them?
I do. I've been saying this recently because it struck me a few weeks ago. When we were shooting, we didn't realize, we thought that we were documenting the climax of something. We didn't realize that what we were shooting was the beginning of something. And
Mm,
so this is a really important point because I look at the news now and the way that the dynamics have shifted, things have gotten immeasurably more hostile, immeasurably more violent, and it's really complicated because the numbers and the data are deceptive. The the deportations are still relatively low. I mean, this is the thing that a lot of people mistake and misunderstand is that, what the administration is really eager to do is perform and show that they're living up to this man that Donald Trump set out for himself when he ran. But when you actually really look at it, stacked against the Obama 1, Obama 2 numbers, his deportations are not radically high. What are incredibly high are detentions. And this is where we have shifted from a conversation about, open borders or closed borders, separations at the border, and now we're talking about the legality in and of itself of the actions of ICE, the actions of the police, the actions of the administration. The idea that someone like Maria, who has asylum legally, but I've told her explicitly, I don't know that you should go to our screenings because ICE
mm,
doesn't care. ICE doesn't care if you have asylum. ICE doesn't care if you're a resident, if you have a green card. These are people who will survey in plain clothes people entering a courthouse to legally pursue, to do it the right way, and they will abduct people as they're walking into the courthouse. So the conversation is no longer about the ethical murkiness of legal or illegal migration. It's now about basic humanity, basic law. What do we care about as a country? How do we want to perform? How do we want to comport ourselves in a political context and in a human context? Are we a country that willfully acknowledges the law and then makes the choice to break it however we want, whenever we want, solely to live up to a manufactured mandate that says people from certain places are inherently invalid in this country and must be deported, even if they haven't done anything wrong? The vast, vast majority of immigrants, certainly migrants from Latin America and elsewhere, the vast, overwhelming majority, something like 95%, absolutely do not have a criminal record. Um, so yeah, I think it's about narrative. I mean, this is where my mind goes. It's what is the story that we're telling the world about who we are as a country? Are we a country that is a country of immigrants, for immigrants, by immigrants, or are we a country that doesn't care about law and doesn't care about human beings?
right. And that's what, is happening. And I think, we can get political here, but, the election that we had a couple of weeks ago, across the
Mm,
board, I think one of, even though those issues were not on the table, that was in the back of many people's minds when they did go to vote that,
mhm.
many people have said, this is not what we voted for. This is
Right,
not what we voted for,
right.
if they voted in that direction.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
and I think it's appalling. I think it's been appalling. It's scary when you have people with masks and we don't know who they are, and they're driving up in cars that are unmarked. We don't. Anybody can come and take somebody now, and
Right,
human traffic them, and
right.
that's the scary part. And so I think in California, I think the governor just said, no, you can't have masks. We're not going to, no more
Mhm.
mask,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we don't know who these people really are, and anybody can show up just saying I'm ICE and I'm going to take them, and then take them, and people are just totally disappearing.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's scary. And there's many people out there now, cards, if you see something, call this number, and help
Mhm.
people. I mean, California could not run without our immigrants.
Of course, of course.
And most of our
Most
country,
industries. Yeah,
most of
most
our,
industries can run.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when people who did vote that way, and they said, "You're taking my workers. Who's going to do
Mhm.
these jobs?" I mean, we in California, obviously, we are the salad bowl of the country, and who's going to go to the back breaking, jobs that these people do to, get our food on the table?
Right.
Go pick the strawberries and the lettuce and all of that. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm off
It's
and
a,
running.
yeah, no, no. It's a really interesting area of the conversation because one of the myths that, and again, I don't totally mean to make this about partisan politics, and I think it's
Right.
worth saying that, the film really intentionally, in the edit, we really intentionally wanted to make it clear that we don't view this as a partisan issue. We don't view this really fundamentally as a political issue. It's a
Hmm.
human issue, and the film's
Right.
goal is to put the viewer in the shoes of people and to make them understand the human, the emotional context of all of this. It's really, if there is an antagonist even in the film, I would argue that it's a Democrat. I mean, the film focuses on the Eric Adams administration and his lack of response.
Oh, yes.
I think it's important to state that I don't view it as a political film, and it is not a partisan film. That being said, so a myth that is propagated by conservative talking points and reporters and politicians is this idea that by removing this labor force, it'll open pathways to Americans for jobs, for shelter, et cetera. But the idea that there's this vast untapped labor force of upper middle class white college educated kids who are going to go into the back room of a Mexican restaurant or work in a field picking strawberries is asinine and inaccurate.
Right.
And as soon as these deportations started happening and the detention started happening, entire industries started to feel it, and everybody voiced, "Look, we need our H-1B workers. We need people here." One of the tasks of this administration was to combat grocery store prices. Everything went up as a result of this.
Right.
Everything went up.
Yeah.
It's something that ripples across all of life, I think.
Are you thinking about doing a documentary about what's going on now?
God, it's such an interesting question. The answer is yes. I'm in production on a new project that really didn't focus on immigration hugely until ICE started its militarized campaign. And I can't say too much about the project, but I was sent an article yesterday about the film is sort of broadly about labor in this country, and I really thought it was about just labor, about the experience of doing a certain job that we rely on. And I was sent an article that ICE had invaded this group of people and were abducting these workers that I'm trying to tell a story about. And it's like I can't I can't get away from this stuff.
No, no. And you've done so well with this one. So maybe this is, and it's so timely. I mean, your documentary, Roads of Fire is very, timely and coming out now. And I think, having a follow-up documentary to this story would be excellent
Yeah,
considering what's going on.
yeah, it's a really important moment. I think that so broadly speaking, I am interested in interrogating this moment. I think that as is often the case, that you find that I find these moments yield incredible art and incredible work. And I think there are going to be some incredible Latin filmmakers, West African filmmakers who tell this story really intimately. I'm excited to do it if it does materialize on my end. But I think that we're going to see some incredible projects about this moment.
I think we are too. I really do. Jacob Soboroff, who I really love on
Mm.
MSN, MS Now, I guess it is. He covers this story really, really well and has traveled all over the country with it. And, he did a documentary, before. So, he may be out there putting one together too. Who knows? But
It needs it. It needs it.
it definitely needs there to be a record of what's going on. Well, let's go back to your film, Roads of Fire. Um, by the way, we lost some audio, so I don't know what's going to happen here. We'll see if we have enough audio for
Okay.
it
Well, I'm
stopped.
here.
It stopped for some reason. So anyhow, I've picked it back up again, but we shall see.
Or
Yeah. So to go back, how did this film come about? Because you have
Mhm.
incredible access to these three people that you follow in this film. So how did this come about, and how did you
Sure.
find the people that you decided to document?
Sure. So I think the best way to do it is to sort of describe chronologically how this all came to be. We were finishing my previous film, a film about Ukrainian teenage refugees and the impact of combat on them. We were editing, and our edit bay was in Midtown. And so this was in, again, late 2022. So we would exit, the building, we'd leave the edit bay on that previous film, and we would walk into Midtown. And it was right at that moment where the buses were leaving people who had been immigrants who'd gotten into Texas, and Greg Abbott had bussed them illegally to New York, oftentimes by force, with no organization, no infrastructure, no planning, and it was all a political tactic to put stress on New York. So we would exit the Bay, and we would just be surrounded by people. There would be lines and lines of people around every block, waiting for shelter, waiting for food, looking for something to communicate with people who could give them guidance. And I got really interested in the fact that I didn't see any representatives from the city. I saw huge numbers of volunteers and humanitarians. And so initially, the film was about that. It was about the humanitarian workers and the impact on them. So I started shooting with Adama. And now the film really tells this chronologically. So I was shooting with Adama, who's a sort of a fixer in New York City. She's an immigrant rights advocate. She's a wonderful person. So I was with her. She got a phone call from this NGO called Evie Loves NYC, who does incredible work. They're a soup kitchen. They're an asylum seeker support center. They do a lot of great stuff. So she got a call from them, and this is captured in the film. And there had been miscommunication with of various advocacy groups and faith-based organizations that were helping coordinate refugees. And so suddenly it was 8 a.m. We were shooting in the Bronx, and EV Loves, which is in the East Village, had 1,000 refugees and migrants who were at their door and they weren't open. And they had no idea how to deal with this. They couldn't cook for them. No one was there, no staff. And it was late November, so it was freezing. I remember it being really, really cold. And these people were dehydrated. They were exhausted. They had just gotten off a bus from Texas, and prior to that, they'd been on the road from, various places in Latin America. So I travel with Adama down to the East Village. This is all captured in real time in the film. And there I met the Evie Loves folks. And so they became major participants in the film. They introduced me to a man named Father Mike Lopez. He's a pastor in Queens who also works with and advocates for refugees. He introduced me to Maria, our our Ecuadorian asylum seeker, who, and we just quickly became friends. She was still very traumatized by her experiences in the jungle and the road. She, came up through the Darien Gap from Ecuador on foot, and she had two kids. But she really courageously told me her story, and she wanted to, after what she'd went through, she saw a lot of importance for herself, I think, and also for the broader public in just sharing her story and just confronting it. And that kind of got us started. And from there, I started to realize that this film was a journey. It was about journeys. It was about pathways. It was about what the momentum that people feel when they're suddenly in a place where they have to flee, and wherever the road takes them, they're going to go. She couldn't go back to Ecuador, and nowadays Ecuador is completely collapsed. Many people flee. When they flee because their economies collapsed. There's war, there's genocide, there are all of these things that make returning simply not an option. There's, what qualifies somebody as a refugee is the legitimate and provable fear of death on return. So she thought it was really important to share her experiences with that. I was just privileged to be there. As we made it, it became clear to me that I needed to go down to that part of the world because I had enough ignorance on my end that I felt I wanted to present the viewer with a holistic understanding of immigration in this country. Why do people flee? From where do they flee? What do they experience on the road? And what waits for them here?
Right.
And that's the goal of the film. If I can give somebody a document that says, by the end of this is the contract between me and the viewer. If you watch these 2 hours of film, by the end of it, you will at least have some broad understanding and a relatively intimate and detailed understanding, but at least a broad understanding of what this issue is and who these people are and what they go through. And I'm lucky if it succeeds, and I feel that it does.
Oh, it totally succeeds. It definitely succeeds. You had incredible access. So tell us about that because, when you started following these people, you're right there going through it with them. So talk about that. That had to be incredibly difficult.
It was again, it comes down to the courage of the people. I mean, they really open themselves up to us. It's not easy to speak on a camera. It's not easy to let somebody into your life, let alone, blink and 3 years have gone by with me with a camera in your face.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so it really comes down to their courage. And I think that everybody understood that the stories were not being told. And I think that's a really important point. The stories of refugees and asylum seekers in this country are so politicized, they're so commodified, they're vended for political purposes, they're used as tools against within the squabbles of politicians. Um, I think that they felt this was an opportunity to kind of have the microphone and tell the world who they are and the actual reasons. I mean, this is the thing, like a day that I'll never forget was on the beaches of Necoclí, Colombia, which is the sort of primary final checkpoint before the Jungle Path and the Darien Gap. And I was invited into this refugee camp, and everybody had an incredibly specific reason for fleeing. We in this country we have this feeling, this idea that there's an economic issue, and they're here to whatever freeload off of a welfare state, something like that. And the reasons that I saw were, these are often upper middle class, upper class people, or working class, or impoverished people, but these are people who had resources that went bankrupt on the road because every step they take, there's a financial transaction that happens from bribing cops, bribing immigration, the buses, the street vendors, everything is marked up specifically to exploit migrants and refugees. So, but by the time they get to Necoclí, they're often completely broke and they're living in a tent on the beach. And so they invited me into this camp, and the stories that I heard were everybody thinks that we're criminals. We're not. I'm trying to go to the United States because Venezuela doesn't have a healthcare system that I can use, and my daughter has cerebral palsy,
Mm.
or my father has stomach cancer, and the only way for him to live is to go to the States where there's an operation he can get because I have a cousin who works at a hospital, and that's why I'm trying to go. So the specificity, the details, the nuances of people's story, that is the meat of this film, and it's
Right.
so important that people understand that. So that's where the access came from. They saw that we were willing to tell their stories, to give them this microphone, this opportunity and platform to be honest with the world. And they really valued that. So they gave us the access, and it comes down to their bravery.
Yes, and they are. They're incredibly brave. Real quick, because we're going to be running out of time. I'd like to talk about the gentleman, Jonathan
Yes.
Guillermo. So let's talk about him and his
Yeah.
part in this documentary.
Jonathan's an interesting guy. He's a
Yeah.
smuggler. He's a human smuggler. He comes in contact with and is sort of subordinate to the cartel, the Gulf cartel. We interacted a huge amount with the Gulf cartel, with the paramilitaries, with gangs down there. He's an incredibly important character, and he's a really, really intricate and important guy. He operates in a very moral gray area that's important for people also to understand. He sort of sees himself as a kind of a gangster Robin Hood. He's an immigrant himself. He migrated from Venezuela to Colombia. And he views himself as performing a really important function. And this is another thing that I encountered when I was down there. The film is shot very on location. It's very experiential. The goal is to bring the viewer through the literal steps that the people take. And so in doing that and getting down to Colombia and working with the cartel and working with the smugglers, it became really clear that the local relationship with these people is one of reliance. Because in a place where the government has collapsed or the government is so corrupt and so interwoven with the issues around you, the cartel in a lot of ways offers infrastructure. They offer order. They offer structure to people's lives. And Jonathan, he participates in an underground economy. He is a smuggler. These are illegal things. And yet he views himself as providing a really important function. People are fleeing war zones. Some of the people that we shot with were Syrians or from Afghanistan. One person that we worked with down there was a former translator for the Afghan army that fled because the Taliban overwhelmed and retook Afghanistan, and his family were in Afghanistan still. So Jonathan was in the process of smuggling him and them out of a place where they will die because of his collaboration with the army. So, Jonathan, we talked a lot about this. He understands that what he does is illegal. He understands that it's part of this system that people think is very immoral and evil, and in some ways that it is. But at the same time, he is helping families escape places that they will die.
Hmm.
And so he's a really important part of that.
Yeah, he really is. And this is a very important film. It really is a very important film. And again, it's timely. Nathaniel, where can people see Roads of Fire?
Yes, we are concluding our theatrical run right now. We've got a few more engagements coming up. You can go to roadsoffire.com. You can go to Roads of Fire on Instagram, for updates on the theatrical showings. We will be on demand and streaming everywhere on January 6th. So
Wonderful.
mark calendars, January 6th. You can find
Wonderful.
the film.
Great. Well, I wish you much success with this film, people. It is a must-see film. It really is, especially with everything that's going on in our country right now. I think this will give you open your eyes, and you'll perhaps have a different viewpoint after you watch this film, which is exactly what we should be having. And it will spark a conversation for sure. For sure.
Mm,
So thank you
hopefully.
for this important work that you're doing, Nathaniel, and I look forward to having you back on the show again.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Bye.